There are many ways to climb in Westeros. Some men are born to castles and crowns, others win their place with swords and shields. But there exists a third path, quieter than steel, sharper than any blade. It is the path of coin. And no man in the history of the Seven Kingdoms walked that path with more skill, more patience, or more ruthless ambition than Petyr Baelish. This is the story of how one man bought a kingdom. Not with armies, not with dragons, but with ledgers, loans, and lies so carefully woven that even the wisest lords never saw the trap until it had already closed around them. Our story begins not in the great halls of King's Landing, but in a place far humbler. A place where the wind cuts cold off the narrow sea and the rocks offer little but salt and suffering. The Fingers. A string of rocky peninsulas jutting into the sea like the bony hand of a drowned giant. This was the seat of House Baelish, not a proud castle, not a prosperous town, just a small tower on the smallest finger of land, ruling over a handful of sheep, and fewer still who cared. Petyr Baelish was born to this poverty in the year 268 after Aegon's conquest. His father had been a minor landholding knight of the smallest sort, the kind of man whose grandsire had been landed for loyalty rather than valour. The Baelishes were nobodies. Their sigil, a grey mockingbird on a field of green, might as well have been invisible for all the respect it commanded in the Vale of Arryn. But young Petyr learned early that a man's birth does not have to be his destiny. He learned it from his father, who had fostered at Riverrun as a boy and earned the friendship of Hoster Tully. That friendship, thin as it was, became the first rung on a ladder Petyr would spend his whole life climbing. When Petyr was 8 years old, his father called in that old debt of affection. Hoster Tully agreed to take the boy as a ward at Riverrun. It was an act of charity. Hoster knew it. Petyr's father knew it. And Petyr, young as he was, knew it too. He arrived at Riverrun with nothing, no wealth, no great name, only a quick mind and a hunger that would never be satisfied. At Riverrun, Petyr found himself in a world he had never known. The castle was vast. The Tullys were great lords, respected and powerful. Their bannermen came and went, knights in fine armour, lords with ancient names. And Petyr was a boy from nowhere, given a place at their table out of pity. He met Hoster's daughters, Catelyn, the elder, beautiful and kind, Lysa, the younger, shy and adoring, and their brother Edmure, a boy closer to Petyr's age, but already marked for lordship. Petyr loved them, or perhaps he loved what they represented, the life he did not have, the name he could never claim. But love, as Petyr would learn, is a weapon that cuts both ways. Catelyn saw him as a little brother, nothing more. Lysa, though, worshipped him with a desperation that even then felt dangerous. Petyr wanted Catelyn. He dreamed of her. And in those dreams, he was not the boy from the Fingers. He was someone worthy, someone great. But dreams do not change the world. Only actions do. And Petyr learned that lesson in blood when Brandon Stark came to Riverrun to claim Catelyn as his bride. Petyr, drunk on youth and jealousy, challenged Brandon to a duel. He demanded the right to fight for Catelyn's hand, as if love and desire could overcome the cold facts of birth and power. Brandon Stark could have killed him, should have, by all rights. But Catelyn begged for Petyr's life, and Brandon, amused or merciful, granted it. He cut Petyr, humiliated him, and left him bleeding in the yard. The maesters saved Petyr's body, but something else died that day. Whatever innocence or naivety he had carried from the fingers bled out onto the stones of River Run. When he healed, he was sent away. Host Atali had tolerated enough. Petyr returned to the veil, but not to the fingers. He had made a single, vital impression before his disgrace. He was clever with numbers. He understood coin in a way most lords never bothered to. And in the Vale, where trade flowed through the ports and the mountain passes, a man who understood coin could be useful. Through connections, through charm, through sheer persistence, Petyr won himself a position in Gulltown. Not a lordship, not a command, a job. He was made a customs officer, a counter of taxes and tariffs on goods flowing in and out of the Vale's greatest port. To most lords, this would have been an insult, a humiliation. But Petyr saw what they did not. Customs was not a punishment. It was an opportunity. Gulltown was one of the busiest ports in the Seven Kingdoms. Ships came from King's Landing, from the free cities, from the Summer Isles, and beyond. They carried silk and spices, wool and wine, steel and grain. Every barrel and bolt of cloth that came off those ships was subject to tax. And someone had to count it. Someone had to keep the books. That someone was Petyr Baelish. He arrived in Gulltown with nothing but his wits and a small chest of personal effects. The customs house was a squat stone building near the docks, smelling of salt and tar and the sweat of labourers. The men who worked there were bored functionaries, lesser sons of lesser houses, performing a job they considered beneath them. They collected the tariffs the law required, skimmed a little for themselves when they thought they could, and otherwise let the world go by. Petyr did not let the world go by. He watched it. He studied it. He learned it. He learned that merchants lied. They always lied. A captain would declare 6 barrels of Dornish wine and hide 12 more below deck. A trader would claim his silks were cotton and hope the customs man was too lazy to check. Smuggling was not the exception. It was the rule. And the customs officers, underpaid and uninterested, let it happen, because catching every lie was impossible. But Petyr did not try to catch every lie. He tried to profit from them. He started small. A merchant would arrive with underdeclared cargo. Petyr would smile, examine the books, and suggest a small fee to overlook the discrepancy. Not a bribe, he would say. An administrative correction. The merchant, relieved to avoid confiscation, would pay. Petyr would pocket half and record the other half as a tariff collected. The books balanced. The crown got something. The merchant got away with something, and Petyr got richer. But that was only the beginning. Petyr realized something the other customs men never did. The power was not in catching smugglers. The power was in knowing who the smugglers were. Knowledge, he learned, was worth more than gold, because knowledge could be traded. Knowledge could be leveraged. Knowledge could be sold to the highest bidder. He began keeping a second set of books, not the official ledger that went to Lord Grafton and from there to the crown, a private ledger. In it, he recorded every ship that came through Gulltown, every captain who paid a bribe, every merchant who underdeclared, every discrepancy and lie and hidden cargo. He recorded names, routes, and schedules. He noted which houses traded with whom, which merchants were reliable, and which were desperate. And then he began to use that knowledge. A merchant who had smuggled before would find Petyr polite, accommodating, eager to help, for a fee. Another merchant, a competitor perhaps, would find himself inspected more carefully, his cargo examined down to the last crate. Petyr was never cruel. He was never obvious. But he tilted the scales, and men noticed. Within 2 years, Petyr Baelish was the man merchants sought out when they arrived in Gulltown. Not because they liked him, but because crossing him was expensive. And still, the official books looked perfect. Revenue from the customs house began to rise, not dramatically, not suspiciously, but steadily, year after year. The tariffs collected increased. Lord Grafton, who oversaw Gulltown, was pleased. The Crown was pleased, and Petyr was indispensable. He learned other lessons too. He learned that lords cared about results, not methods. As long as the gold flowed upward, no one asked how it was gathered. He learned that complexity was a shield. The more complicated the bookkeeping, the harder it was for anyone to question it. And he learned that debts, even small ones, were chains. A merchant who owed Petyr a favour could be called upon later. A captain who had been allowed to pass without inspection would remember the kindness. A minor lord whose shipment had been expedited would feel gratitude. Petyr collected these debts like a miser collects coins. And when the time came, he would call them in. But Petyr did not spend his days only in the customs house. He moved through Gulltown's taverns and markets, its warehouses and inns. He listened. He watched. He learned who hated whom, who was in debt, who was desperate. He learned that information moved faster than ravens if you knew where to listen. A drunken sailor might mention a fleet gathering in the Stepstones. A merchant's wife might gossip about a lord's gambling debts. A servant might let slip that his master was selling land. All of it went into Petyr's mind. All of it became a piece of the map he was drawing. A map of power. A map of weakness. A map of the world as it truly was, not as the lords pretended it to be. And as the years passed, Petyr's reputation grew. The minor lordling from the Fingers was now spoken of as a financial talent. A man who could make gold appear where there was none. A man who could solve problems others could not. He began to dress better. Not richly. He could not afford that yet. But carefully. He favoured mockingbird pins and small tokens of his house, reminding those who met him that he was, however minor, still a lord. He spoke with courtesy and charm. He never raised his voice. He never made threats. But somehow people left his presence feeling that it was wiser to have Petyr Baelish as a friend than as an obstacle. And then, in the year 290 after Aegon's conquest, everything changed. Lord Jon Arryn, Warden of the East and Lord of the Eyrie, was also Hand of the King to Robert Baratheon. Robert had won the throne by conquest, smashing the Targaryen dynasty and taking the crown for himself. But Robert was a warrior, not a ruler. He loved the hunt, the feast, the tourney. He had no patience for the endless details of governance. Jon Arryn, by contrast, was a man who understood that kingdoms were built on details. Taxes had to be collected, debts had to be paid, accounts had to be kept. And the master of coin, the man responsible for the crown's finances, had recently died. Jon Arryn needed a replacement, not a lord. Lords were too proud, too ambitious, too likely to use the position for their own gain. He needed someone capable, someone hungry, someone who would work, rather than delegate, someone who understood that coin was not just wealth, but power. He remembered the boy from Riverrun, the minor ward, the one Hoster Tully had sent away after that foolish duel. Jon Arryn had heard reports from Gulltown. The customs revenues were up. The port was running more efficiently. And the man responsible was a Baelish, a nobody, a man with no great house to protect him, no bannerman to shield him, a man who would owe everything to Jon Arryn. Perfect. The Raven came to Gulltown on a cold morning. Petyr Baelish, customs officer, minor lord of the Fingers, was summoned to King's Landing. He was to be named Master of Coin. He was to serve on the small council of King Robert Baratheon, first of his name. Petyr read the letter once, twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply walked to the window of his small office and looked out at the harbour. The ships came and went. The merchants shouted. The gulls cried overhead. Gulltown had been his training ground. He had learned its lessons well. How to manipulate ledgers, how to profit from other men's lies, how to turn information into influence, and influence into power. But Gulltown was small. The Vale was small. King's Landing was the heart of the 7 kingdoms, and the Master of Coin controlled the crown's purse, the crown's debts, the crown's gold. Petyr had climbed the first rungs of the ladder. Now he was being offered a chance to climb higher than he had ever dreamed, higher than Riverrun, higher than the Vale, all the way to the Iron Throne itself. He thought of Catelyn, married to Eddard Stark now, far away in Winterfell, lost to him. He thought of the boy who had bled in the yard, humiliated and broken. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who understood the world, a man who knew that love was a weakness, but desire could be a weapon, a man who knew that lords might have the swords, but the man who controlled, the gold controlled the kingdom. Petyr Baelish left Gulltown a week later. He carried little with him, a few chests of clothes, his books, his ledgers, and a mind full of lessons learned in the counting houses and docks of the Vale. He did not look back. The Mockingbird was flying to King's Landing, and the Iron Throne, though its occupants did not yet know it, had just invited the most dangerous man in Westeros to hold its purse. The climb had only just begun. King's Landing stank. That was Petyr Baelish's first thought when he arrived at the capital of the 7 kingdoms. He had expected grandeur. He had expected majesty. And there was some of that, to be sure. The Red Keep rose above the city like a crown of stone, its walls the colour of dried blood in the afternoon sun. The great sept of Baelor gleamed with crystal and marble. The streets were wider than anything in Gulltown, crowded with more people than Petyr had ever seen in one place. But beneath it all was the smell. Sweat and horse dung, rotting fish from the harbour, the sour reek of the tanneries, the smoke of 1,000 cook fires, and underneath everything else, the faint but unmistakable stench of human waste. 500,000 people lived in King's Landing, and they all ate and slept and shit, and the city bore the weight of them all. Petyr rode through the streets on a modest horse, with a small escort of men Jon Arryn had sent to meet him at the gates. He noted everything. The beggars in the alleys, the gold cloaks keeping a lazy watch, the merchants hawking their wares, the whores calling from the windows of Flea Bottom. This was the heart of the realm, the city that ruled 6 others, and it was rotting from the inside. Perfect, Petyr thought. Rot meant weakness. Weakness meant opportunity. He was brought to the Red Keep and given chambers appropriate to his new station. Not grand, but comfortable. A sitting room, a bedchamber, a desk near the window, servants to see to his needs. He was a member of the small council now, Master of Coin, one of the 6 most powerful men in the kingdom, at least in name. But Petyr knew better than to believe the title meant anything yet. Power was not given, it was taken, and he would have to prove himself before any of these lords would take him seriously. Jon Arryn summoned him that first evening. The Hand of the King kept his chambers in the Tower of the Hand, a separate building connected to the main keep by a covered walkway. Petyr climbed the stairs and found Jon Arryn waiting in his solar, seated behind a heavy oak desk covered in papers and ledgers. Jon Arryn was an old man, 60 years or more, his hair grey, his face lined with age and care. But his eyes were sharp, and when he looked at Petyr, there was a weight to his gaze. "Lord Baelish," Jon Arryn said, "you came swiftly." "I serve at the king's pleasure, my lord Hand," Petyr replied, bowing just low enough to show respect, but not deference. Jon Arryn gestured to a chair. Petyr sat. "Do you know why I chose you?" Jon Arryn asked. "Because I increased the customs revenues in Gull Town," Petyr said, "and because I am not a threat." Jon Arryn's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Honest, that is good. Yes, you are not a threat. You have no great house behind you, no banners to call, no alliances to protect. You are a man who must prove his worth through work, not birth. That makes you useful." "I am pleased to be useful, my lord." "Do not be too pleased," Jon Arryn said, and now his tone hardened. "The Crown's finances are a disaster. My predecessor as Master of Coin was a fool who cared more for his own purse than the realm's. The Crown is in debt, serious debt. King Robert spends gold like water, and the treasury is nearly empty. Your task is to fix this." Petyr nodded slowly. "May I see the books?" Jon Arryn pushed a stack of ledgers across the desk. "These are the last 5 years of accounts. Study them, understand them, and then tell me how we stop this kingdom from going bankrupt." Petyr took the ledgers and stood. "I will have answers for you within the week, my lord." "Good," Jon Arryn said. "And Baelish, do not think to play clever with me. I have no patience for games. The realm needs a Master of Coin who can be trusted. If I find you lining your pockets, I will have your head." Petyr bowed again. "You have my loyalty, my lord Hand." He left the Tower of the Hand with the ledgers under his arm and returned to his chambers. He dismissed the servants, lit candles, and sat at his desk. Then he opened the first ledger and began to read. What he found was worse than he had imagined, and far, far better. The previous Master of Coin had been a Lord Chelsted, a minor nobleman with more pride than sense. His bookkeeping was a mess. Revenues were listed without sources. Expenses were recorded without explanation. Whole columns of numbers simply did not add up. And the debts. Gods, the debts. The Crown owed money to the Lannisters. Nearly 3 million gold dragons. That alone was staggering. Petyr stared at the number, tracing the entries back through the years. Borrowing for this, borrowing for that. A tourney here, a feast there, a new suit of armour for the king, a gift for a visiting lord. All of it borrowed from Tywin Lannister, who was happy to lend because debt was leverage. But the Lannisters were not the only creditors. The Crown owed money to the Iron Bank of Braavos. Not as much, perhaps 500,000 dragons. But the Iron Bank was not forgiving. They did not care about politics or alliances. They cared about repayment. And if the Crown defaulted, the Iron Bank would fund the Crown's enemies without hesitation. There were also smaller debts, to the faith, to merchants, to lesser lords who had lent money and expected it back with interest. Altogether, The crown owed nearly 4 million gold dragons. The annual revenue of the crown was perhaps 2 million. And the expenses, under King Robert, were closer to 3. The kingdom was spending more than it earned, every year, and borrowing to cover the difference. It was insane. It was unsustainable. It was perfect. Petyr leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time since arriving in King's Landing. Jon Arryn wanted him to fix this, to balance the books, to make the debts go away. But Petyr saw something Jon Arryn did not. The debts were not a problem. They were a tool. A kingdom drowning in debt was a kingdom desperate for anyone who could keep the gold flowing. And the man who controlled that flow controlled the kingdom. He spent the next 3 days studying every entry, every loan, every expense. He noted where the money came from and where it went. He identified patterns, waste, corruption, opportunities, and then he began to plan. On the 4th day, he requested an audience with Jon Arryn and presented his findings. "The crown is in debt, my Lord Hand," Petyr said, standing before Jon Arryn's desk with the ledger open. In his hands, 4 million gold dragons, give or take. The Lannisters hold the largest share. The Iron Bank is second. The rest is scattered among a dozen smaller creditors. Jon Arryn's face was grim. "I know this. What I need to know is how we pay it back." "We cannot," Petyr said simply. Jon Arryn's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The crown's revenue is 2 million dragons per year," Petyr said. "The crown's expenses, under King Robert, are 3 million. We are borrowing 1 million dragons every year just to stay afloat. If we tried to pay down the debt, we would need to cut expenses by more than half. The king would have to stop holding tourneys, stop holding feasts, stop giving gifts. The lords would grumble, the small folk would notice, and the crown's prestige would suffer." "So what do you propose?" Jon Arryn asked. Petyr closed the ledger. "We do not pay down the debt, my lord. We manage it. We borrow more, but we borrow wisely. We ensure that the loans come with favourable terms. We pay the interest, not the principal. We keep the creditors happy by making them believe they will be repaid eventually. And in the meantime, we use the borrowed gold to keep the kingdom running." Jon Arryn stared at him. "You are proposing we go deeper into debt." "I am proposing we survive, my lord," Petyr said. "The crown cannot function without gold. If we cut expenses too drastically, the kingdom will fracture. Lords will rebel. Alliances will break. The realm needs stability, and stability costs money, borrowed money if necessary." Jon Arryn was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You are clever, Baelish. Too clever, perhaps. But you may be right. The king will not accept austerity. Robert Baratheon won the throne with a warhammer, not a ledger. He has no interest in penny pinching." "Then let me manage the coins, my lord," Petyr said. "I will keep the kingdom solvent. I will keep the gold flowing, and I will ensure the debts do not spiral out of control." Jon Arryn nodded slowly. "Very well. But I will be watching you, Baelish. Do not forget that." "I would never dream of it, my lord." Petyr left the Tower of the Hand with Jon Arryn's approval. He was now, in truth, the master of coin. And he had just been given permission to manage the kingdom's debts as he saw fit, which meant he had just been given permission to reshape the realm. But before he could begin, he needed to understand the other players at the table. The small council met every few days in the Red Keep, and Petyr attended his first meeting a week after his arrival. The council chamber was a long room with a heavy table at its centre. Narrow windows let in pale light. A map of the 7 kingdoms hung on one wall. The other walls were bare stone. Jon Arryn sat at the head of the table, as hand of the king. To his right sat Grand Maester Pycelle, an ancient man with a long white beard and a habit of speaking in slow, ponderous tones. To Jon Arryn's left sat Varys, the master of whisperers, a eunuch from Essos who dressed in soft robes and smelled of lavender. His face was powdered, his hands folded, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. Also present was Lord Stannis Baratheon, the king's younger brother, who served as master of ships. Stannis was a hard man, lean and humorless, with a jaw like an anvil. He did not smile, he barely spoke. But when he did, his words were sharp and precise. And finally, there was Sir Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who stood near the door in his white cloak and armour, silent and watchful. King Robert did not attend. Petyr learned quickly that Robert rarely attended council meetings. He preferred the training yard, the hunt, and the wine cellar. Jon Arryn called the meeting to order. Lord Baelish has joined us as the new Master of Coin. He comes with a strong record from Gulltown and my full confidence. I trust you will all give him the cooperation he needs to restore order to the Crown's finances. Pycelle inclined his head. Welcome, Lord Baelish. A heavy burden you carry, but a noble one. Varys smiled. Ah, Lord Baelish, I have heard much about you. A man of talent and ambition. How delightful. Stannis said nothing. He simply looked at Petyr with cold, measuring eyes. Petyr bowed to the table. I am honoured to serve, my lords. The meeting proceeded. Jon Arryn discussed the state of the realm. Harvests were good in the Reach. Trade was strong in the west. There were reports of wildling activity beyond the wall, but nothing the Night's Watch could not handle. A few minor disputes between lords needed settling. And then Jon Arryn turned to Petyr. Lord Baelish, what is the state of the treasury? Petyr had prepared for this. The treasury holds approximately 300,000 gold dragons, my Lord Hand, enough to cover immediate expenses for the next 2 months. After that, we will need to borrow again or raise new revenues. Stannis spoke for the first time. Borrow from whom? The Lannisters, my lord, Petyr said. They remain our most reliable creditor. The Iron Bank's terms are less favourable. We owe the Lannisters too much already, Stannis said flatly. Every loan puts us deeper in Tywin Lannister's pocket. True, my lord, Petyr said. But the alternative is to raise taxes, which would anger the lords, or to cut the crown's expenses, which his grace would not tolerate. Stannis's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Varys spoke next, his voice soft and smooth. Might I suggest, Lord Baelish, that you consider other sources of revenue? The Crown's incomes from tariffs and customs could be increased with better oversight. And there are always opportunities in a city as large as King's Landing. Petyr met Varys's eyes. The eunuch was testing him, seeing how he would respond. I will explore all options, Lord Varys, Petyr said. The Crown's finances will be my first priority. Varys smiled again. I am certain they will. The meeting ended shortly after. Petyr returned to his chambers and sat at his desk, thinking. The small council was a nest of vipers. Pycelle was a fool, loyal to the Lannisters. Stannis was rigid and suspicious, a man who would not be bought or manipulated. And Varys was dangerous. He dealt in secrets, just as Petyr did. They would be rivals, whether they admitted it or not. But Petyr had one advantage. He controlled the gold, and gold, in the end, mattered more than secrets or swords. He opened a fresh ledger and began to write his plans, his strategies, the debts he would manage, the loans he would arrange, the revenues he would quietly increase, the expenses he would hide. Jon Arryn wanted the books balanced, but Petyr would do something far more valuable. He would make the books say whatever he needed them to say, and in doing so, he would make himself indispensable. King's Landing was a cesspool, a rotting, stinking pit of corruption and waste. But Petyr Baelish had learned long, ago that rot could be profitable, if you knew where to look, and he was very good at looking. Petyr Baelish understood something that most lords never learned. Debt was not weakness. Debt was control. A man who owed you gold was a man you owned. Not completely, not obviously, but owned nonetheless. He would think twice before crossing you. He would listen when you spoke. He would remember always that his comfort depended on your goodwill, and if you were clever, you could turn that single debt into a dozen smaller obligations, each one another link in a chain that bound him to you. The Iron Throne owed millions, and Petyr intended to make that debt his ladder. His first task was simple. Understand where the gold came from and where it went. The crown's revenues flowed from many sources: tariffs on trade, taxes from the crown lands, fees from the guilds, fines from the courts. All of it passed through the Master of Coin's hands before filling the treasury or paying the crown's expenses. But there were gaps, places where the numbers did not quite add up. 1,000 dragons here, 500 there, small enough that no one noticed, large enough that over months and years they became significant. Petyr began with the customs of King's Landing. The city's harbour was second only to Old Town, and every ship that docked paid tariffs on its cargo. But the collection was handled by harbour masters and tax collectors, most of whom had held their positions for years. They knew the system. They knew how to skim. Petyr did not stop them. Instead, he met with each one privately. He reviewed their books. He pointed out discrepancies. Not all of them, just enough to make them nervous. And then he made them an offer. "Continue as you have," he would say, his voice soft and reasonable. "Take your share. I do not begrudge a man his living. But from now on, you report to me. Every ship, every cargo, every tariff collected, and when I ask for a favor, you will provide it." Most agreed immediately. A few hesitated. Those who hesitated found themselves reassigned to less profitable posts. Word spread quickly. The Master of Coin was not a fool, and he was not to be crossed. Within 6 months, Petyr had a network of informants throughout the city's docks. He knew which merchants were honest and which were smugglers. He knew which captains carried contraband and which goods were underdeclared. He knew the flow of trade better than anyone in King's Landing, and that knowledge was power. But the docks were only the beginning. King Robert loved tournaments. He loved feasts. He loved hunting and drinking and giving lavish gifts to lords who flattered him. Every event cost a fortune, and every fortune had to come from somewhere. Petyr made certain it came from the Lannisters. Tywin Lannister was the Warden of the West and the richest man in the 7 kingdoms. His gold came from the mines of Casterly Rock, deep and seemingly endless. He had already lent the crown 3 million dragons. Petyr intended to make it 4, then 5, then more. He began carefully. A letter to Casterly Rock, polite and professional. The crown required funds for the upcoming tourney celebrating the king's name day. 50,000 dragons should suffice. Terms were generous. Interest at 5%, repayment over 2 years. Tywin's response came within a fortnight. The loan was approved. Petyr arranged the tourney. He hired builders to construct the viewing stands. He paid the heralds and the cooks. He arranged prizes for the winners and ensured that every lord who attended was fed and entertained. The event was a grand success. Robert was delighted. The lords were impressed. And the crown's debt to the Lannisters grew by another 50,000 dragons. Petyr recorded the loan in the official ledgers. But he also kept a second set of books, hidden in his chambers, locked and carefully coded. In those books, he recorded the truth. Not just the loan, but how the money had actually been spent. How much went to the tourney? How much went to bribes? How much went into his own pocket? Because Petyr had learned in Gulltown that the art of managing money was not honesty. It was plausibility. The official books needed to look correct. They needed to balance, or close enough that no one would question them. But the truth could be hidden. And the gap between the official numbers and the real numbers was where power lived. The tourney became a pattern. Every few months, Robert would demand another feast, another hunt, another spectacle. And every time, Petyr would arrange the financing. Sometimes from the Lannisters, sometimes from the Iron Bank of Braavos, sometimes from lesser lords who wanted to be seen as loyal to the crown. The debts grew, but so did Petyr's control over them. The Iron Bank was different from the Lannisters. Tywin Lannister lent money because it gave him influence over the crown. The Iron Bank lent money because it was profitable. They did not care about politics. They cared about repayment, and they had a reputation for ruthlessness. Kings who defaulted on their debts to the Iron Bank often found their enemies suddenly well-funded. Petyr borrowed from the Iron Bank carefully. Not too much, not too fast, just enough to keep them invested in the crown's survival. A loan for 100,000 dragons to repair the city walls. Another loan for 50,000 to replenish the royal granaries. Each loan carefully documented, each repayment made on time. The Iron Bank's representatives in King's Landing were satisfied. The crown was a reliable debtor, and Petyr was a competent master of coin. What they did not know was that the money borrowed for the walls had been split 3 ways. A third went to actual repairs. A third went to bribes and payments to ensure loyalty among the gold cloaks. And a third went into Petyr's private accounts, hidden behind shell merchants and false names. The granaries received even less. Half, the borrowed gold, went to grain. The other half went to Petyr's growing network of informants, brothels, and businesses throughout the city. But the books balanced. The Iron Bank was repaid, and no one questioned where the money had truly gone. Petyr also began to lend money himself. Not openly, not in his own name, but through proxies and intermediaries. A lord needed gold to repair his castle. Petyr arranged a loan through a merchant in Gulltown. A merchant needed capital to expand his fleet. Petyr provided it through a moneylender in Duskendale. Each loan carried interest. Each loan created a debt. And each debt was another thread in the web Petyr was weaving. He was careful to keep his own involvement hidden. The lords and merchants who borrowed never knew the gold came from Petyr Baelish. They thought they were dealing with independent lenders. But Petyr held the notes. And when the time came, he could call in those debts, or sell them, or forgive them in exchange for favors. Debt, Petyr had learned, was the most versatile tool in the world. But gold alone was not enough. Petyr needed information. He needed to know what the lords were thinking, what they were planning, what they feared. And for that, he needed eyes and ears throughout the city. He began acquiring brothels. It started with a single establishment in the Street of Silk. A modest place, clean and well run, catering to merchants and minor lordlings. The owner was in debt, struggling to pay protection money to the gold cloaks. Petyr offered to buy him out. The price was fair. The owner accepted. Petyr did not run the brothel himself. He hired a capable woman to manage it. But he visited regularly. He listened to the gossip. He learned which lords visited, and what they said when they were drunk and careless. He learned their tastes, their weaknesses, their secrets. And he began to keep records. Not of the transactions, of the visitors, who came, when, with whom, what they paid for, what they said. It was Varys's game, but Petyr played it better. Varys had his little birds, his network of children and spies scattered throughout the city. But Petyr had something Varys did not. He had places where men went willingly, where they lowered their guard, where they revealed themselves. Within a year, Petyr owned 3 brothels. Within 2 years, 5. He did not advertise his ownership. Most people believed the establishments were independent. But the gold flowed to Petyr, and the information flowed to Petyr, and his power grew in the shadows. He also cultivated allies among the city's merchants and guildmasters. These were men who cared nothing for lordly honour or knightly valour. They cared about profit, and Petyr spoke their language. He would arrange favourable contracts for certain merchants, ensuring they won bids for crown supplies. In return, they would provide him with information. Which houses were buying what? Which lords were selling land? Which families were in financial trouble? He would expedite permits for guildmasters, cutting through the crown's bureaucracy. In return, they would remember his kindness. And when he needed a favour, a vote, a voice in their favour, they would provide it. Slowly, carefully, Petyr built a network of obligation throughout King's Landing, not through fear, not through force, but through favours given and debts owed. And all the while, the official ledgers showed nothing but competence. Revenues increased, year after year. Tariffs were collected more efficiently. The crown's debts were managed. The treasury, though never full, never quite ran dry. Jon Arryn was pleased. King Robert did not care, as long as the gold kept flowing. And the other members of the small council saw only what Petyr wanted them to see. A minor lord from the Vale, doing his job, keeping the kingdom solvent. Only Varys seemed suspicious. The eunuch would watch Petyr during council meetings, his smile fixed, his eyes calculating. Once, after a meeting, Varys approached him in the corridor. "Lord Baelish," Varys said, his voice soft as silk, "you have done remarkable work as master of coin. The crown's revenues have never been higher." "You are kind to say so, Lord Varys," Petyr replied. "I wonder, though," Varys continued, "how you manage it. The previous master of coin struggled for years to collect even half what you bring in. You must have a secret." Petyr smiled. "No secret, my lord. Only diligence, and a willingness to work with those who understand the value of cooperation." "Cooperation," Varys repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, a useful thing. I hope we might cooperate as well, you and I. After all, we both serve the realm." "Of course," Petyr said, "the realm above all." Varys inclined his head and walked away, his robes whispering against the stone floor. Petyr watched him go. The eunuch was dangerous. He knew too much, saw too much. But Varys played his own game, and for now their interests did not conflict. Petyr controlled the gold. Varys controlled the secrets. As long as both were useful to the crown, they could coexist. But Petyr knew it would not last forever. Eventually, one of them would need to win, and Petyr intended to make certain it was him. As the years passed, the crown's debt continued to grow. Robert's spending never slowed. Tournaments, feasts, gifts, whims indulged without thought to cost. Jon Arryn would occasionally try to rein in the king's excesses, but Robert would simply laugh and wave him off. "We won a kingdom, Jon," Robert would say. "What good is it if we cannot enjoy it?" And Petyr would quietly arrange another loan, another 50,000 dragons from the Lannisters, another 100,000 from the Iron Bank. The interest payments alone were staggering, consuming a quarter of the crown's annual revenue. But Petyr made certain the payments were always made. The creditors were kept satisfied, the debts were managed, and the chain grew longer. By the year 298, the crown owed nearly 6 million gold dragons, 3.5 million to the Lannisters, 1.5 million to the Iron Bank. The rest scattered among a dozen lesser creditors. It was an impossible sum. The crown could never repay it. Not in Robert's lifetime, probably not in his children's lifetimes. The kingdom was, for all practical purposes, bankrupt. It survived only because the creditors believed they would eventually be repaid. And they believed that because Petyr Baelish told them so. He managed the debts with the skill of a master juggler, keeping all the balls in the air. He would borrow from the Lannisters to repay the Iron Bank. He would borrow from the Iron Bank to pay interest to the Lannisters. He would raise new revenues to cover the gaps, always just enough to keep the system running. The lords of Westeros did not understand finance. They saw only that the kingdom functioned. Tourneys were held. Feasts were served. Gold cloaks were paid. The granaries were full, or full enough. Everything seemed fine. But Petyr knew the truth. The kingdom was a house built on sand. One strong wind, one sudden crisis, and it would all collapse. And when it did, Petyr would be ready. Because he had done something else, something no one else knew. He had begun moving his own wealth out of the crown's reach. The gold he skimmed, the bribes he collected, the profits from his brothels and loans. All of it went into accounts held by false names, in banks in Braavos and Pentos and Myr. He had property in the free cities, ships that carried his goods, investments that would survive even if the Iron Throne fell. Petyr Baelish was loyal to the crown. He served the realm. He kept the kingdom running. But Petyr Baelish was more loyal to himself. And when the time came, when the debts finally crushed the kingdom, he would step aside. He would survive. He would thrive, because he had learned the most important lesson of all. The man who controls the gold does not need to sit on the throne. He only needs to decide who does. Gold opened doors, but information decided what lay behind them. Petyr Baelish had spent 5 years as master of coin, and in that time he had learned something vital. The lords of Westeros spent their days arguing over honours and slights, over ancient claims and proud lineages. They cared about swords and banners and who sat where at feasts. But while they argued, Petyr listened. And while they postured, Petyr learned. He learned that power in King's Landing did not flow from the throne alone. It flowed through 1,000 small channels, a word whispered in the right ear, a favour granted at the right moment, a secret revealed or concealed at precisely the right time. The lords thought they ruled because they had armies, but armies were slow and expensive and difficult to control. Information was fast, information was cheap, and information, properly used, could topple kingdoms. Varys understood this. The master of whisperers had built his power on secrets, on his network of little birds who scurried through the city, gathering whispers and rumours. Varys knew who was bedding whom, who was plotting what, which lords were loyal and which were not. He was indispensable to the crown because he saw things no one else could see. But Varys had a weakness. His little birds were children, urchins pulled from the streets and trained to spy. They were loyal because Varys fed them, sheltered them, cut out their tongues so they could never betray him. But they were still children. They saw what they saw, but they did not always understand what it meant. Petyr's network was different. His informants were adults, merchants, tax collectors, harbour masters, servants, whores, people who understood the world and could interpret what they saw, and most importantly, people who came to him willingly, because he paid them, or because they owed him favours. The brothels were the heart of it. By the year 293, Petyr owned 7 establishments in King's Landing, not just in the Street of Silk, though that was where the finest ones stood. He also owned quieter places, a tavern near the docks where sailors drank and talked, a bathhouse in the shadow of the Red Keep, where servants gossiped while they scrubbed floors, a gaming house where minor lordlings lost money they could not afford and drowned their shame in wine. Each establishment had a keeper, someone Petyr trusted to manage the day-to-day business. But each keeper also had instructions. Listen, watch, remember, and once a week report everything to Lord Baelish. The reports came in written form, delivered by discreet messengers. Petyr would read them in his chambers, late at night, when the Red Keep was quiet. He would note the names, the details, the patterns, and he would add them to his private records. Lord Renly Baratheon visits the Street of Silk every 3rd day. He favours a particular establishment, a particular girl. He drinks Arbor Gold and talks about his brother the king. He complains that Robert ignores his counsel. He jokes about Stannis's rigid nature. Harmless talk, perhaps, but revealing. Sir Boros Blount of the Kingsguard owes money to a moneylender in Flea Bottom. Gambling debts, significant ones. He is 2 months behind on payment and growing desperate. A man in debt is a man who can be bought. A merchant from Lys arrived in port yesterday with a cargo of silk and spices. He met with Grand Maester Pycelle in private. The meeting lasted an hour. The merchant left with a purse of gold. What was discussed? Unknown, but worth noting. None of these details by themselves meant much. But over time, patterns emerged, connections formed. Petyr began to see the hidden architecture of King's Landing, the web of relationships and obligations that held the city together. He also began to use what he learned. A minor lord from the Stormlands arrived in King's Landing seeking a position at court. He wanted to be appointed as a royal tax collector, a lucrative post. He petitioned Jon Arryn. He petitioned King Robert. He was ignored. Then he came to Petyr. Petyr received him in his chambers at the Red Keep. The lord was nervous, sweating despite the cool air. He bowed too deeply and spoke too quickly. Lord Baelish, I thank you for seeing me. I know you are a busy man, but I hope you might— You want the tax collector position in Storm's End, Petyr said, cutting him off. You believe it would restore your family's fortunes, which have suffered since your father's poor investments in a failed trading venture 3 years ago. The Lord's mouth fell open. How did you— I make it my business to know things, Petyr said. Sit. The Lord sat, his hands trembling slightly. Petyr leaned back in his chair. The position you seek is valuable. Many men want it, but I can arrange for you to have it. For a price. I have little gold to offer, my lord. I do not want your gold, Petyr said. I want your loyalty. You will take the position. You will perform your duties competently. And when I ask you for information about the Stormlands, which lords are prospering, which are struggling, which are unhappy with the crown, you will provide it. Do we have an understanding? The Lord hesitated only a moment. Then he nodded. Yes, my lord. You have my word. Good, Petyr said. I will speak to the Hand this afternoon. You will have your appointment by the end of the week. The Lord left, grateful and indebted, and Petyr gained another pair of eyes, this time in the Stormlands. He repeated this pattern dozens of times. A favour here, a position there, a loan forgiven, a debt called in. Each time he gained something in return: information, loyalty, leverage. Within 2 years, Petyr had informants in every major city in Westeros. Not armies, not spies in the shadows like Varys's little birds, just people, ordinary people, who owed him favours, or who found it profitable to keep him informed. A merchant in Lannisport, who reported on the movements of Lannister gold. A dockmaster in White Harbour, who noted which ships arrived from Essos and what they carried. A innkeeper in Old Town, who listened to the whispers of maesters in training. A seamstress in Highgarden who sewed for Lady Olenna Tyrell and heard everything discussed in the gardens. Petyr paid them modestly. He did not demand constant reports. He simply asked them to write to him when they saw or heard something unusual. And because he paid fairly and never asked too much, they remained loyal. The information came slowly, but it came, and Petyr sorted it, analysed it, stored it in his mind and in his coded ledgers. He learned that Tywin Lannister was preparing to increase gold production in the Westerlands, hiring new miners and expanding old shafts. This meant Tywin expected to need more gold soon. Why? Perhaps to fund something. Perhaps to repay debts of his own. Worth watching. He learned that Lord Stannis Baratheon was growing frustrated with his position as master of ships. Stannis did all the work, but Robert took all the credit. Stannis believed he deserved more respect, more authority. Frustration could be exploited. He learned that the Faith was unhappy with the Crown's growing debts. The High Septon had been quietly approached by representatives of the Iron Bank, asking about the Crown's ability to repay. The Faith had significant wealth of its own. If the Crown needed another creditor, the Faith might be willing, for a price. Each piece of information was a tool. Each tool could be used to build something larger. But Petyr's most valuable source of information was not in the brothels or the docks or the far corners of the realm. It was right inside the Red Keep, the servants. There were hundreds of them, cooks and maids, grooms and washerwomen, men who cleaned the fireplaces and women who changed the linens. They moved through the castle like ghosts, invisible to the lords who lived there. But they saw everything, they heard everything, and they talked. Petyr cultivated them carefully. He learned their names. He asked about their families. He tipped generously when they brought him wine or cleaned his chambers. And sometimes, when the moment was right, he would ask a question. I heard Lord Renly was in a foul mood yesterday. Do you know why? I wonder if the king is planning another hunt. I should prepare the accounts for it. Grand Maester Pycelle seemed troubled this morning. I hope he is not unwell. The servants would answer without thinking. They were flattered that a lord noticed them, spoke to them, and the information they provided was often more valuable than anything Varys's little birds could offer. A maid mentioned that Queen Cersei had been arguing with her husband late into the night. Robert had called her cold. She had called him a drunk. They had not shared a bed in weeks. Groom mentioned that Sir Jaime Lannister often visited the Queen's chambers when the king was away, sometimes for hours. The groom thought nothing of it. After all, Jaime was the Queen's brother. Family visits were natural. But Petyr noted it, and he remembered. He also made certain that the servants were well treated. When a cook's daughter fell ill, Petyr quietly paid for a healer. When a stable hand's father died, Petyr sent a purse of silver to help with the funeral. These were small kindnesses. They cost little, but they bought loyalty. The servants began to see Petyr as different from the other lords. He was not cruel. He did not shout or strike them. He noticed them. He cared, or seemed to. And so when he asked questions, they answered willingly. Varys noticed, of course. The eunuch noticed everything. One evening, after a small council meeting, Varys fell into step beside Petyr as they walked through the corridors of the Red Keep. "Lord Baelish," Varys said, his voice soft and pleasant. "You have become quite popular among the castle staff. They speak well of you." "I treat them with respect," Petyr said. "It costs nothing and makes life more pleasant." "Indeed," Varys said, "though I wonder if respect is all you seek. A servant who feels grateful might be inclined to share certain observations, things they see and hear in the course of their duties." Petyr smiled. "Are you suggesting I am poaching your little birds, Lord Varys?" "Not at all," Varys said. "My little birds are quite loyal, but I would hate to see us working at cross purposes. After all, we both serve the realm." "The realm," Petyr agreed, "above all." Varys studied him for a moment, his smile never faltering. Then he inclined his head and walked away. Petyr continued to his chambers, his mind working. Varys was warning him. Subtly, politely, but a warning none the less. The eunuch did not want competition. He did not want another player in the game of whispers and secrets. But Petyr had no intention of stopping. If anything, he would expand his network. Because information was not just power. It was insurance. As long as he knew more than anyone else, as long as he could see threats before they materialized, he would survive. And survival was all that mattered. By the year 295, Petyr Baelish had become one of the most informed men in Westeros. He knew who was in debt and who was prospering. He knew which marriages were happy and which were miserable. He knew which lords were loyal to the crown and which were quietly planning rebellion. He knew where the gold flowed and where it stopped, and he used that knowledge carefully. When Jon Arryn needed to know whether a certain lord could be trusted, Petyr would provide an answer. When the king wanted to appoint a new castellan to a royal keep, Petyr would suggest a candidate, one who happened to owe Petyr a favour. When a dispute arose between two houses, Petyr would quietly provide information to both sides, ensuring the conflict lasted just long enough to keep them distracted. He never lied outright. He never had to. The truth, carefully selected and strategically revealed, was far more effective than any lie. But Petyr also kept secrets, things he learned that no one else knew, things that could be dangerous if revealed, things that could be devastating. He knew that Grand Maester Pycelle was reporting to Tywin Lannister, sending ravens to Casterly Rock with information about the small council's deliberations. Pycelle believed himself subtle, but Petyr had bribed a stable boy who saw the ravens being sent, noted the times and destinations. He knew that Lord Renly was ambitious, not just for honour or glory, but for the throne itself. Renly made jokes about it, half-serious comments to his friends. But Petyr heard the jokes and saw the calculation behind them. And he knew something else, something he had pieced together from a dozen small observations. The Queen and her brother were not just close, they were lovers. Petyr had no proof, not yet. But the signs were there, the late-night visits, the way Cersei looked at Jaime, the way Jaime lingered near her, even when propriety demanded he leave. If it were true, it would be treason. The Queen's children would be bastards. The succession would be thrown into chaos. It would be the most valuable secret in the Seven Kingdoms. But Petyr did nothing with it. Not yet. Secrets were like gold. They were most valuable when spent at exactly the right moment. Too early, and the opportunity was wasted. Too late, and someone else might discover it first. So Petyr waited. He watched. He gathered more information. He built his network larger and stronger. He made himself indispensable to the crown and invisible to his enemies. And when Jon Arryn began to ask questions about the Queen's children, about their lineage, about why they all had golden hair while Robert's bastards were dark-haired, Petyr knew the moment was approaching. The secret would come out. The realm would fracture. And when it did, the man who controlled the information, the man who knew everything and owed nothing, would be the one who survived. Petyr Baelish did not sit on the Iron Throne. He did not command armies. He did not wear a crown. But he held the strings. And when the time came, he would pull them. The raven arrived at dawn on a cold morning in the year 298 after Aegon's conquest. Petyr Baelish was in his chambers, reviewing the latest reports from his network, when a knock came at his door. "Enter!" he called. A servant entered, holding a sealed letter. "From the Eyrie, my lord, marked urgent." Petyr took the letter, dismissed the servant, and broke the seal. The message was brief, written in Lysa Arryn's hasty hand. "Jon is dead. Fever took him in the night. The king does not know yet. I am coming to King's Landing. Burn this." Petyr read it twice. Then he held the letter to a candle and watched it turn to ash. Jon Arryn was dead. The hand of the king, the man who had brought Petyr to King's Landing, the man who had trusted him with the realm's finances, was gone. And with him went the last check on Robert's excesses, the last steady hand guiding the kingdom. This changed everything. Petyr sat back in his chair and thought. Jon Arryn had been investigating something before he died. Petyr had heard whispers. The Hand had been asking questions about King Robert's children, about their appearance, about their parentage. He had visited brothels in the city, not for pleasure, but to see Robert's bastards. He had spoken with masters and servants, gathering information. He had been close to discovering the truth Petyr had already pieced together months ago. Queen Cersei's children were not Robert's. They were Jaime's. Born of incest, every one of them golden-haired and green-eyed like their true father. Jon Arryn had been about to expose them, and now Jon Arryn was dead. Petyr did not believe in coincidences. Fever did not strike so conveniently. Someone had killed the hand of the king, someone who had much to lose if his investigation continued. The Lannisters. Petyr rose and moved to the window, looking out over King's Landing. The city was waking, smoke rising from 1,000 chimneys. Somewhere in the Red Keep, Robert Baratheon was sleeping off last night's wine, unaware that his closest friend and advisor was gone. Somewhere, Cersei Lannister was probably breathing easier, believing the threat had passed. But the threat had not passed. It had only changed form, because Jon Arryn had not worked alone. He had confided in someone. Petyr was certain of it. A man as cautious as Jon Arryn would not have pursued such dangerous knowledge without sharing it, ensuring that if something happened to him, the truth would not die with him. The question was, who? Petyr suspected he knew. Lord Stannis Baratheon, the king's younger brother. Stannis had been close to Jon Arryn. They had worked together for years, both serious men, both dedicated to duty above all else. If Jon Arryn had shared his suspicions with anyone, it would have been Stannis. But Stannis had left King's Landing 3 weeks ago. He had returned to Dragonstone, his seat, taking his wife and household with him. At the time, it had seemed unremarkable. Stannis often grew tired of the court and retreated to his island fortress. But now, with Jon Arryn dead, the timing seemed significant. Stannis knew, and Stannis had fled before the axe could fall, which meant Robert would need a new hand of the king, and whoever Robert chose would shape the kingdom's future. Petyr considered his options. He could not become Hand himself. He was too low-born, too unimportant. The great lords would never accept it. But he could influence who was chosen, and he could position himself to survive whatever came next. He needed to speak with the Queen. Petyr found Cersei Lannister in the gardens that afternoon. She was alone, or as alone as a queen could be, with only 2 handmaidens standing at a discreet distance. She sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, her face calm, her hands folded in her lap. But Petyr could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. "Your Grace," Petyr said, bowing, "might I have a word?" Cersei looked up at him, her green eyes cold and assessing. "Lord Baelish, what do you want?" "To offer my condolences," Petyr said. "Lord Arryn was a great man. His death is a loss for the realm." "How kind of you to say," Cersei said, her tone suggesting she found nothing kind about it. Petyr stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I also wanted to assure your Grace that the Crown's finances remain stable, despite this tragedy. The transition to a new hand will be smooth. I will ensure it." Cersei studied him for a moment. "You are very efficient, Lord Baelish. Jon Arryn is not yet cold, and already you think about transitions." "Someone must," Petyr said. "The realm does not stop for grief." Cersei's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "True enough. Tell me, Lord Baelish, who do you think my husband will choose as the new hand?" "That depends on who counsels him," Petyr said. "Robert values loyalty above all else. He will choose someone he trusts, someone from the old days, a friend." "Eddard Stark," Cersei said, her voice flat. Petyr nodded. "Most likely. Robert fought the war with Ned Stark at his side. They were fostered together at the Eyrie under Jon Arryn. They are closer than brothers. If Robert asks Stark to be his hand, Stark will accept. Cersei's expression darkened. Eddard Stark is a fool, honourable and rigid and utterly predictable. He will be an obstacle. Perhaps, Petyr said, or perhaps he will be useful. Stark knows nothing of the court, nothing of politics. He will be out of his depth, and a man out of his depth makes mistakes. Cersei looked at him sharply. What are you suggesting? Only that Stark's honour may blind him to certain truths, Petyr said carefully. If he comes to King's Landing, he will see what he expects to see. And if he sees something he should not, well, honourable men are predictable. They do what they believe is right, even when it destroys them. Cersei was silent for a long moment. Then she stood. You are a clever man, Lord Baelish. Too clever, perhaps. But clever men are useful. Continue to manage the crown's gold, and if I require your counsel, I will send for you. Your Grace, Petyr said, bowing again. Cersei walked away, her handmaidens following. Petyr watched her go, his mind already moving ahead. Cersei was dangerous, but she was also arrogant. She believed herself untouchable. She believed the secret of her children's parentage was safe now that Jon Arryn was dead. But secrets never stayed buried. Not forever. And when the truth came out, Petyr intended to be on the winning side, whichever side that was. 3 weeks later, Robert Baratheon announced that he would travel north to Winterfell. He would ask Eddard Stark to be his new Hand of the King. The court buzzed with the news. Some were pleased. Stark was respected, even loved by many. Others were concerned. Stark had not left the north in 9 years. He was a stranger to the politics of King's Landing. Petyr saw opportunity in chaos. While Robert travelled north, Petyr continued his work. He arranged loans, he paid bribes, he gathered information, and he made a decision. When Eddard Stark arrived in King's Landing, Petyr would offer him friendship. Not because he liked Stark, not because he respected him, but because Stark was Catelyn's husband. And Catelyn, the woman Petyr had loved since childhood, the woman who had rejected him and married another, was now within reach. Petyr had not seen Catelyn in years, but he thought of her often. He had never forgotten the humiliation at Riverrun, the duel with Brandon Stark, the way Catelyn had looked at him with pity rather than love. That wound had never fully healed. But now, with Ned Stark as Hand of the King, Catelyn would come to King's Landing. She would be close, and Petyr would finally have the chance to show her what he had become. Not the boy from the Fingers, not the minor ward, but a lord, a member of the small council, a man of power and influence. He told himself it was not about love. Love was a weakness. This was about pride, about proving himself, about showing Catelyn that she had made a mistake all those years ago. But deep down, in a place he rarely acknowledged, Petyr knew the truth. He still wanted her, and he would do whatever it took to have her, or, failing that, to destroy everything she loved. Robert returned to King's Landing with Eddard Stark at his side. Ned came reluctantly, his face grave, his northern reserve like a wall between him and the southern court. He brought his daughters with him. Sansa, a girl of 11, with her mother's beauty. Arya, younger and wild, more wolf than lady. But Catelyn did not come. She remained in Winterfell. Her youngest son had fallen from a tower and lay in a coma. She would not leave him. Petyr felt a flicker of disappointment, but he pushed it aside. Catelyn would come eventually, and in the meantime he had work to do. He approached Ned Stark on the man's 3rd day in the capital. Stark was in the Tower of the Hand, trying to make sense of the ledgers and documents Jon Arryn had left behind. He looked tired and overwhelmed. "Lord Stark," Petyr said, bowing. "Welcome to King's Landing. I am Petyr Baelish, Master of Coin." Ned looked up, his grey eyes wary. "Lord Baelish, I have heard of you. You were a ward at Riverrun, I believe." "I was," Petyr said. "I had the honour of knowing your lady wife when we were children. She was kind to me, as was her father, Lord Hoster." Ned's expression softened slightly. "Catelyn speaks well of her time at Riverrun. She mentioned you in her letters." "I'm flattered," Petyr said. "I wanted to offer my assistance, Lord Stark. I know the transition to Hand must be difficult. If there is anything I can do to help you settle in, you need only ask." Ned studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. "Thank you, Lord Baelish. I may take you up on that. These ledgers are a maze. Jon Arryn left notes, but they are difficult to decipher." "I would be happy to explain them," Petyr said. "The Crown's finances are complex, but I have worked with them for years. I can guide you through the details." Over the following weeks, Petyr became a regular presence in Ned Stark's solar. He explained the debts, the revenues, the expenses. He answered Ned's questions patiently, never condescending, always helpful. And slowly, Ned began to trust him. It was almost too easy. Ned Stark was exactly as Petyr had expected, honourable to a fault. He believed that men were what they appeared to be. He believed that service to the realm meant honesty and duty. He did not suspect treachery because he could not imagine it. Petyr, of course, imagined nothing else. He learned that Ned was investigating Jon Arryn's death. The former Hand had left behind a book, a lineage of the great houses. Ned was reading it, trying to understand what Jon Arryn had been looking for. Petyr could have told him. He could have revealed the truth about Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, but he did not, because the truth, revealed too soon, would benefit no one but the Lannisters. They would simply kill Ned Stark and anyone else who knew. No, the truth needed to come out at the right moment, when it would cause maximum chaos, when the kingdom would fracture beyond repair. And Petyr was very good at waiting for the right moment. Robert Baratheon, meanwhile, continued to spend the crown's gold as if it were endless. He announced a grand tournament to celebrate his appointment of Ned Stark as Hand. The tourney would be the largest in years, with prizes totaling 90,000 gold dragons. 90,000 dragons the crown did not have. Petyr arranged the financing, another loan from the Lannisters. The debt grew to 6.5 million. The interest payments were now consuming nearly a third of the crown's revenues. The kingdom was drowning, but no one seemed to notice except Petyr and Stannis. Lord Stannis Baratheon, brooding on Dragonstone, knew. Petyr was certain of it. Stannis knew about the debts. He knew about the Queen's children. He knew the kingdom was on the edge of a precipice. But Stannis said nothing. He simply waited, gathering his strength, preparing for the war he knew was coming. The tourney was held, knights jousted, lords feasted. Robert drank and laughed and spent gold he did not have. And Ned Stark watched it all with growing unease. Petyr watched too. He saw the pieces moving into position. Robert's health was failing. The king was fat, drunk, and reckless. He would not live much longer. And when he died, the realm would tear itself apart over the succession. Joffrey would claim the throne. But Stannis would challenge him, declaring the boy a bastard. Renly might make his own claim, backed by the Tyrells. The North would follow Ned Stark's lead. The Lannisters would fight to protect their secrets. War was coming, and war would destroy the kingdom Petyr had spent years hollowing out from within. Everything he had built, all the debts and bribes and secrets, all the golden chains he had forged, were about to pay off. Because when the kingdom burned, Petyr Baelish would not burn with it. He would rise from the ashes, richer and more powerful than ever. All he had to do was make certain the fire started at exactly the right moment. And he was very good at starting fires. The day Eddard Stark discovered the truth was the day the kingdom began to die. Petyr watched it happen from the shadows. He watched Ned piece together what Jon Arryn had learned. The lineage book, the visits to Robert's bastards, the golden-haired children of the Queen and the black-haired children of the King, the impossibility of it all. Ned Stark was not a stupid man. He was simply an honest one. And honest men, when confronted with lies, always thought the solution was to reveal the truth. Petyr could have told him that truth, without power to enforce it, was worthless. But Ned would not have listened. Instead, Petyr watched and waited, and when the moment came, he acted. It happened in the throne room. Robert was dying from a boar's tusk to the gut, gored while hunting, drunk and careless, just as Cersei had planned. Ned held the king's final words, a decree naming him Lord Regent until Joffrey came of age. But the decree did not say, "My son Joffrey." It said, "My heir." A careful distinction, because Ned knew Joffrey was not Robert's son. Ned made his move. He approached Petyr in the corridors of the Red Keep the night before Robert died. "Lord Baelish," Ned said, his voice low and urgent. "I need your help." "Of course, Lord Stark," Petyr replied. "What can I do?" "The City Watch," Ned said. "The gold cloaks. How many men are there?" 6,000, Petyr said. "Give or take." "Who commands them?" "Janos Slynt," Petyr said. "A man of flexible loyalties." Ned's jaw tightened. "Can they be bought?" Petyr allowed himself a small smile. "Anyone can be bought, Lord Stark. The question is the price, and whether you are willing to pay it." "The realm is at stake," Ned said. "When Robert dies, Joffrey will claim the throne. But he is not Robert's son. He is a bastard born of incest. I have proof. I must act before Cersei does." "A dangerous game," Petyr said quietly. "It is not a game," Ned snapped. "It is justice." Petyr studied him for a moment. This foolish, noble, doomed man. Petyr could see exactly how this would end. Ned would try to seize power. He would fail, and he would die. Unless someone guided him toward a different outcome. But which outcome served Petyr best? "If you want." "The gold cloaks," Petyr said. "I can arrange it. But it will cost, say, 50,000 dragons, to secure their loyalty when the moment comes." Ned nodded. "Do it, whatever it takes." "And what will you do with this loyalty once you have it?" Petyr asked. "I will secure the throne for Robert's true heir," Ned said. "Stannis Baratheon. He is the rightful king." Stannis. Of course. The rigid, humorless brother who would never forgive a debt or forget a slight. If Stannis became king, men like Petyr would find themselves scrutinized, questioned, possibly removed. Stannis had no use for clever men who played both sides. But if Joffrey became king, backed by the Lannisters, then Cersei would rule as Queen Regent. And Cersei, for all her arrogance, was predictable. She could be managed. She could be manipulated. Petyr made his choice. "Leave Janos Slynt to me," Petyr said. "When the time comes, the gold cloaks will be yours." Ned gripped his shoulder. "Thank you, Lord Baelish. Catelyn was, Right to trust you. Petyr smiled. I live to serve. Ned left, believing he had secured the city watch, believing he had an ally. Petyr immediately went to Cersei. He found the queen in her chambers, pacing like a caged lioness. Her brother Jaime was there, standing by the window, his hand on his sword. They both turned when Petyr entered. What do you want? Cersei demanded. To save your children's lives, Petyr said calmly, and perhaps the realm. Cersei's eyes narrowed. Speak plainly. Lord Stark knows, Petyr said. He knows about Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. He plans to act as soon as Robert dies. He has asked me to buy the loyalty of the City Watch so he can seize control and crown Stannis. Jaime's hand tightened on his sword. Then we kill Stark tonight. No, Petyr said. Too obvious, and it would turn the North against you forever. Ned Stark is beloved. Kill him in secret, and you make him a martyr. His bannermen would march south within the month. Then what do you suggest? Cersei asked. Let Stark make his move, Petyr said. Let him think he has the gold cloaks. And then, when he acts, the gold cloaks turn on him. Not on my order, on yours. Stark will be revealed as a traitor. You will have him arrested, and you will have the legal justification to deal with him as you see fit. Cersei considered this. And the gold cloaks will obey me? For the right price, Petyr said, which I will arrange. 50,000 dragons from the crown's coffers. 50,000? Jaime said. That is necessary, Petyr cut in. Unless you want to fight 6,000 armed men in the streets. This way, they fight for you, not against you. Cersei smiled slowly. You are devious, Lord Baelish. I like that. Do it. Buy the gold cloaks, and when Stark moves against my son, crush him. Petyr bowed. As you command, your grace. He left the Queen's chambers and went directly to Janos Slynt, the commander of the City Watch. Slynt was a crude man, ambitious and greedy, with a love of gold that outweighed any sense of honor. Lord Baelish, Slynt said, grinning when Petyr arrived at his office. What brings you to my humble establishment? Opportunity, Petyr said. He placed a purse on the table. Heavy. The coins clinked. 50,000 gold dragons, for you and your men. All I ask is that when the time comes, you follow the Queen's orders, not Lord Stark's. Slynt opened the purse and stared at the gold inside. Then he looked up at Petyr. Stark thinks he has us already, doesn't he? He does, Petyr said. Let him continue to think that, until the moment you prove him wrong. Slynt laughed. You are a bastard, Baelish, a clever bastard. I like that. He pocketed the purse. You have my word. The gold cloaks serve the crown, and the crown, at the moment, wears a lion's mane. Excellent, Petyr said. 2 days later, Robert Baratheon died. The boar's wound festered, and the maesters could do nothing. The king's last words were for Ned, muttered through wine and pain. And then he was gone. Within hours, the Red Keep became a battlefield of whispers and schemes. Cersei moved first. She tore up Robert's decree, the one naming Ned as Lord Regent. She declared Joffrey king. She summoned the small council and demanded their loyalty. Ned, meanwhile, gathered his men. Fewer than 50 Northmen in a city of 500,000. But he believed he had the gold cloaks. He believed justice would prevail. He confronted Cersei in the throne room. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, a boy of 12, golden-haired and arrogant. Cersei stood beside him, regal and cold. The Kingsguard surrounded them, white cloaks gleaming. Ned stood in the center of the hall, flanked by his guards, and held up the decree. King Robert's will names me Lord Regent. Joffrey is not fit to rule." "Joffrey is the king," Cersei said, "and you, Lord Stark, are a traitor." "I am no traitor," Ned said. "I serve the realm, and the realm deserves the truth." He turned to the assembled lords and guards. "Joffrey Baratheon is not Robert's son. He is a bastard, born of incest between Queen Cersei and her brother Jaime. He has no claim to the throne. The rightful king is Stannis Baratheon." Gasps echoed through the hall, shocked faces, whispers of disbelief. Cersei's face went white with rage. "You dare." "I dare because it is the truth," Ned said. He turned to Janos Slynt, standing at the entrance to the hall with his gold cloaks. "Commander Slynt, arrest the Queen and her children. Seize Sir Jaime. Do your duty." Slynt smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I am doing my duty, Lord Stark, to the Queen." He nodded. The gold cloaks drew their swords, but not against Cersei, against Ned Stark. Ned's guards barely had time to react. The gold cloaks fell on them like wolves. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed. Blood spilled on the polished floor. Ned drew his sword, but it was hopeless. He was surrounded. His men were dying around him. And Petyr Baelish stepped forward from the crowd, a dagger in his hand. "I did warn you not to trust me," Petyr said softly, and he pressed the blade to Ned's throat. Ned's eyes widened, betrayal and disbelief warring in his expression. "You drop your sword, Lord Stark," Petyr said, "or I open your throat here and now." Ned's sword clattered to the floor. The gold cloaks seized him, forced him to his knees. Cersei descended from the throne, her face alight with triumph. "Take him to the dungeons and kill the rest of his men." The slaughter was brief and brutal. Ned's Northmen fought bravely, but they were outnumbered 20-1. Within minutes it was over. Ned Stark was in chains. His men were dead. And Joffrey Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, king in all but legitimacy. Petyr cleaned his dagger and stepped back into the shadows. He had done what needed to be done, and in doing so he had ensured his place at the table. Cersei owed him. Joffrey owed him. The gold cloaks answered to him. And Ned Stark, the honourable fool, would pay the price for his honour. The realm erupted into chaos within days. Word of Ned's arrest spread like wildfire. The North called its banners. Robb Stark, Ned's eldest son, marched south with an army. He declared himself king in the North, rejecting Joffrey's claim. The Riverlands rose in rebellion, led by Catelyn's brother Edmure and her uncle Brynden. In the south, Renly Baratheon fled King's Landing and declared himself king. He rode to Highgarden and married Margaery Tyrell, securing the support of the wealthiest house in Westeros. And on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon ground his teeth and prepared for war. He would not let his brother's bastard sit the throne. He would not let Renly steal what was rightfully his. The War of the Five Kings had begun, and Petyr Baelish sat in the Red Keep, managing the crown's finances while the realm tore itself apart. The war was profitable. Armies needed to be fed. Soldiers needed to be paid. Weapons and armour had to be bought, and all of it required gold. Petyr arranged loans, from the Lannisters, who were happy to fund their own cause, from the Iron Bank, who cared nothing for which king won as long as they were repaid, from the Faith, from merchants, from anyone willing to lend. The crown's debt soared. 7 million dragons. 8 million. 9. But the gold kept flowing, because Petyr made certain it did. He also began to position himself for the aftermath. He cultivated Cersei's trust by providing the funds she needed to fight the war. He whispered counsel to young King Joffrey, feeding the boy's cruelty while pretending to guide him toward wisdom. And when Tyrion Lannister arrived to serve as Hand of the King in his father's stead, Petyr greeted him warmly. "Lord Tyrion," Petyr said, "welcome to King's Landing. I trust you will find the city to your liking." Tyrion, a dwarf with mismatched eyes and a mind as sharp as any blade, studied Petyr carefully. "Lord Baelish, I have heard much about you, the man who makes gold appear from thin air. I prefer to think of it as creative accounting," Petyr said with a smile. "Creative," Tyrion repeated. "An interesting word. I look forward to reviewing your books." Petyr's smile did not waver. "Of course, my Lord Hand. They are at your disposal." But Petyr was not worried. His books were a masterpiece of misdirection. They showed enough truth to seem honest and hid enough lies to protect him. Tyrion was clever, but he was also busy. He had a war to manage, a king to control, and a sister to placate. He would not have time to untangle Petyr's web. Not before it was too late. As the war raged on, Petyr continued to profit. He lent money to both sides through intermediaries. He sold information to the Lannisters and to their enemies. He positioned himself as indispensable, the man who kept the kingdom running even as it bled itself dry. And through it all, he kept his eyes on the prize. Not the throne. Never the throne. The throne was a death sentence. But power. Real power. The kind that came from controlling the gold, the information, the debts, the kind of power that survived kings and kingdoms. Because Petyr Baelish had learned the most important lesson of all. Chaos was not a pit. Chaos was a ladder. And he was very, very good at climbing. The war consumed Westeros like a fever. Armies marched, castles burned. Thousands died in fields and forests, their blood soaking into the earth. And through it all, Petyr Baelish sat in the Red Keep, counting coins and pulling strings. The War of the Five Kings, they called it. 5 men claiming the Iron Throne, each with armies and banners and ancient rights. Joffrey Baratheon in King's Landing, backed by Lannister gold. Stannis Baratheon on Dragonstone, grinding his teeth over stolen birthright. Renly Baratheon in the south, crowned by flowers and promises. Robb Stark in the north, calling himself king in the north. And across the narrow sea, though few knew it yet, Daenerys Targaryen, the last dragon, dreaming of home. But Petyr knew the truth. The war was not about crowns or thrones. It was about gold. Specifically, who still had it when the killing stopped. And Petyr intended to make certain he did. The crown's expenses during wartime were staggering. The city watch needed to be paid. The royal household needed to be maintained. The Lannister armies fighting in the Riverlands and the north needed supplies. Food, weapons, horses, wagons, medicine, tents, everything an army required to function. A single battle could cost 50,000 gold dragons, a siege twice that, and the war showed no signs of ending. The treasury was empty within the first 3 months. Petyr had drained it carefully over the years, skimming and redirecting, but Robert's excesses and Joffrey's war had finished what remained. The crown was running entirely on borrowed money. Petyr arranged loan after loan. He wrote to Casterly Rock, to Tywin Lannister, who was now Hand of the King in everything but name, while he commanded the Lannister armies in the field. Tywin understood that losing the war meant losing everything, including the millions his house had already lent. So he sent more gold. Another 200,000, then 500,000. then more. The debt to House Lannister climbed past 4 million gold dragons. It was an impossible sum. Even if the crown won the war, even if Joffrey held the throne for 50 years, the debt could never be fully repaid. The interest alone consumed half the crown's annual revenue. But Tywin Lannister was not lending money to be repaid. He was lending it to own the Iron Throne. And Petyr made certain he understood that ownership came with a price. The Crown is grateful for House Lannister's continued support, Petyr wrote in his careful hand. However, we must consider the political implications of such dependence. The other lords whisper that the boy king is a puppet of Casterly Rock. Perhaps it would be wise to secure additional funding from neutral parties to demonstrate the Crown's independence. Tywin's response was terse. Do what you must, but the loans must be repaid. Petyr smiled when he read it. Tywin was worried. Good. A worried creditor was a creditor who could be managed. Petyr turned to the Iron Bank of Braavos. He had maintained excellent relations with their representatives in King's Landing, always paying on time, always communicating clearly. The Iron Bank respected competence, and Petyr was nothing if not competent. He requested a meeting with Tycho Nestoris, a thin man with cold eyes and a mind like an abacus. They met in Petyr's chambers, wine on the table, ledgers spread between them. Lord Baelish, Tycho said in his accented common tongue, you seek another loan. I do, Petyr said. 500,000 dragons, to fund the war effort and maintain stability in King's Landing. Tycho studied the ledgers. The Crown already owes the Iron Bank nearly 2 million dragons, and you owe House Lannister more than 4 million. The interest payments alone are substantial. They are, Petyr agreed, but the Crown's revenues will recover once the war ends. Trade will resume. Taxes will be collected. The debt can be serviced. Can it? Tycho asked. Or are you simply borrowing from one creditor to pay another, hoping the illusion holds until someone else inherits the problem? Petyr met his eyes. The Iron Bank has funded wars before. You understand that victory requires investment. If the Crown falls, you lose everything. If the Crown survives, you profit. The question is whether you believe we will survive. Tycho was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. 500,000 dragons, at 8% interest. Repayment begins in 2 years, whether the war is over or not. Agreed, Petyr said. They shook hands. The gold would arrive within the month. Petyr made note of it in his ledgers. Both the official ones and the private ones locked in his chambers. The official ledgers showed the loan, the terms, the intended use. The private ledgers showed the truth. 200,000 would go to the war. 100,000 would go to bribes, ensuring loyalty among key players in King's Landing. 50,000 would go to Petyr's network of informants, keeping his eyes and ears across the realm. And the remaining 150,000 would disappear into Petyr's private accounts in Braavos and Pentos, hidden behind shell companies and false names. No one would ever know. The numbers balanced, the Crown received funding, the war continued, and Petyr grew richer. But money alone could not win a war. Petyr understood that. Battles were won with swords and strategy, and so he watched the war carefully, adjusting his position as needed. Stannis Baratheon attacked King's Landing in the year 299. He came with a fleet and an army, determined to take the city and claim his throne. The Battle of the Blackwater was brutal and bloody. Stannis' ships filled the Blackwater Rush. His men stormed the walls with ladders and siege towers. For a time, it seemed the city would fall. Joffrey cowered in the Red Keep. Cersei drank wine and prepared to poison herself and her children rather than face Stannis' justice. The gold cloaks began to desert, unwilling to die for a crown that might not survive the night. But Tyrion Lannister, serving as hand in his father's absence, had prepared a surprise. Wildfire. Thousands of jars of the alchemist's volatile green flame placed on ships and ignited in the middle of Stannis' fleet. The wildfire erupted in a wave of green fire. Ships exploded. Men screamed as they burned. The Blackwater rush became an inferno. And then, at the critical moment, Tywin Lannister arrived with reinforcements. He rode through the city gates with the Lannister army and the forces of Highgarden. Renly was dead, killed by shadowy magic on the eve of his own assault, and the Tyrells had switched sides, throwing their strength behind Joffrey. Stannis was defeated, his fleet destroyed, his army scattered. He fled back to Dragonstone, bitter and diminished. King's Landing was saved, and the cost was another 1,000,000 gold dragons. Petyr tallied the expenses, rebuilding the fleet, paying the soldiers, compensating the families of the dead, repairing the city walls, cleaning up the wreckage. All of it required gold that the crown did not have. He arranged more loans. He squeezed more revenue from the city's merchants and guilds. He raised tariffs on imports, and he made certain that every coin spent was recorded, accounted for, and carefully hidden in layers of bureaucracy so complex that no one could untangle it. The crown's debt now stood at 10,000,000 gold dragons, an impossible, ruinous sum. The kingdom was bankrupt in all but name. It survived only because its creditors believed repayment was possible, and they believed that because Petyr Baelish told them it was. But Petyr knew the truth. The crown would never repay these debts, not fully. The best it could hope for was to continue making interest payments and borrowing more to cover the gaps. It was a pyramid of debt, growing taller and more unstable with every passing year. And when it finally collapsed, the creditors would tear the kingdom apart. The Lannisters would demand repayment, perhaps by seizing crown lands or revenues. The Iron Bank, if it lost patience, would fund the crown's enemies. The smaller creditors would riot, demanding their gold back. The realm would fracture, not over succession, but over money. Petyr didn't fear this collapse. He welcomed it. Because when the kingdom fell apart over gold, the man who controlled the gold would decide what came next. While the war raged, Petyr also advanced his personal position. He had been promised rewards for his loyalty, and he intended to collect. After the Battle of the Blackwater, Joffrey held a ceremony in the throne room to honour those who had saved the city. Tyrion Lannister, who had led the defence, was ignored and humiliated, but others were rewarded. Petyr knelt before the Iron Throne, and Joffrey, in his boy-king arrogance, spoke the words that changed everything. For your service to the crown, Lord Petyr Baelish, we grant you the castle of Harrenhal and name you Lord Paramount of the Trident. The assembled lords gasped. Harrenhal was a ruin, cursed and broken, its towers melted by dragonfire 3 centuries past. But it came with lands and titles, and the Lord Paramount of the Trident was one of the highest ranks in the realm, equal to the wardens of the north, south, east, and west. Petyr, the minor lordling from the Fingers, was now one of the great lords of Westeros. He bowed low. Your grace honours me beyond measure. I will serve faithfully. It was a hollow title in many ways. Harrenhal was a ruin. The Riverlands were in chaos, occupied by Lannister and northern armies. The small folk were starving, the fields burned, the lords scattered or dead. Petyr could not claim his new seat. He could not govern his new lands. But he had the title, and titles, once granted, were difficult to take away. More importantly, Petyr had his eyes on a greater prize, the Vale of Arryn. Lysa Arryn, Jon Arryn's widow, had fled to the Eyrie after her husband's death. She had taken her son Robert, a sickly boy of 6, and sealed herself in the impregnable mountain fortress. She refused to take sides in the war. She refused visitors. She simply sat in her castle and waited. But Petyr knew Lysa. He had known her since childhood. She had loved him once, or thought she did. She had written him letters over the years, letters full of longing and desperation. She was lonely, paranoid, unstable, and she controlled the Vale, one of the few regions untouched by war, an army of knights, fertile lands, wealth and safety. Petyr began to correspond with Lysa, carefully, gently. He reminded her of their shared past. He hinted at affection. He suggested that the world was dangerous, that she needed a strong man to protect her and her son. Lysa responded eagerly. She sent letters filled with emotion, begging him to come to the Vale, to marry her, to be the father young Robert needed. Petyr smiled when he read them. The Vale was within his grasp. But he could not simply leave King's Landing. Not yet. He was too valuable to the crown. Cersei and Joffrey needed him to keep the gold flowing. Tywin needed him to manage the debts. And Petyr needed to ensure that when he left, he did so with the crown's blessing. His opportunity came in the form of a marriage alliance. The Tyrells, having saved King's Landing, demanded a reward. Margaery Tyrell, who had been married to Renly before his death, was now a widow. Beautiful and clever, she was a prize any house would desire. And Olenna Tyrell, the matriarch of House Tyrell, demanded that Margaery marry King Joffrey. Cersei resisted at first. She did not want to share power with the Tyrells, but Tywin overruled her. The alliance was necessary. Without the Reach's gold and grain, the crown would starve. Joffrey was betrothed to Margaery. Sansa Stark, his previous betrothed, was set aside. The Tyrells were pleased. The crown was secured. And Petyr saw his chance. Sansa Stark, Ned's daughter, was a valuable piece on the board. She was the key to the north. If someone married her, they could claim Winterfell, perhaps even reconcile the northern lords to the crown. Petyr proposed a plan to Tywin. Send Sansa to the Vale, marry her to one of the Vale lords, secure the Vale's support for the crown. Tywin considered this. The Vale has stayed neutral. Perhaps an alliance would bring them into the war. Precisely, Petyr said, and I could deliver that alliance. Lysa Arryn trusts me. If I go to the Vale as the crown's representative, I can negotiate not only Sansa's marriage, but the Vale's entry into the war on our side. Tywin nodded slowly. Do it. Bring the Vale into the fold, and if you succeed, your lordship of Harrenhal will be confirmed. You will have lands, power, and the crown's gratitude. Petyr bowed. I will not fail. But Petyr had no intention of marrying Sansa to a Vale lord. He had a different plan entirely. He arranged Sansa's escape from King's Landing. It was not difficult. The girl was watched, but not closely. Petyr had friends in the Red Keep, servants who owed him favours. On the night of Joffrey's wedding to Margaery, while the city celebrated, Sansa disappeared. She was smuggled onto a ship and taken across the narrow sea. From there, she would be brought to the Vale, where Petyr was already travelling. When Petyr arrived at the Eyrie, Lysa welcomed him with open arms. She was older now, her beauty faded, her mind more fragile than ever. But she still loved him, or believed she did. "Petyr," she said, tears streaming down her face, "you came. You finally came." "I promised I would," Petyr said, taking her hands, "and I always keep my promises." They were married within the week, a quiet ceremony in the Eyries Sept. No lords, no bannermen, just Lysa, Petyr, and a handful of witnesses. Petyr Baelish was now Lord of Harrenhal, and Lord Protector of the Vale. He commanded the Knights of the Vale, controlled its wealth, and held its impregnable fortress. And he had done it all without drawing a sword. Lysa was happy for a time. She clung to Petyr, desperate and possessive. She spoke constantly of her love for him, of how they would be together forever, of how he would protect her and her son. Petyr played the role of devoted husband. He was kind to young Robert Arryn. He was patient with Lysa's moods. And he waited, because Lysa knew too much. She knew that he had convinced her to poison Jon Arryn, to send the letter to Catelyn blaming the Lannisters, to start the chain of events that led to war. She was a liability, a witness to his crimes. And witnesses, in Petyr's experience, did not live long. One evening he took Lysa to the Moon Door, a hole in the floor of the Eyries High Hall that opened onto a 600-foot drop to the rocks below. They stood together, looking out at the mountains, the snow-capped peaks glowing in the fading light. "We are safe here," Lysa said, leaning against him. "No one can touch us." "No one," Petyr agreed. "I have always loved you, Petyr," Lysa said. "Since we were children. I loved you then, and I love you now." Petyr looked at her, this broken, foolish woman who had helped him destroy a kingdom, and he felt nothing. "I know," he said, and then he pushed her. Lysa's scream echoed off the mountains as she fell. It seemed to last forever. And then it stopped. Petyr stood at the moon door for a moment, looking down at the empty air. Then he turned and walked back into the hall. The guards found him moments later, his face a mask of grief. "My wife," he said, his voice shaking. "She fell, the moon door. She was standing too close, and she fell." The guards rushed to the edge, but there was nothing to see. Lysa's body was far below, broken on the rocks. Petyr collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "Gods, gods, what have I lost?" The lords of the Vale came to the Eyrie for the funeral. They offered condolences. They spoke of Lysa's fragility, her long grief over Jon Arryn's death. They did not question the story. And Petyr, as Lysa's widower and Lord Protector of the Vale, assumed full control of the region. Young Robert Arryn was now his ward. The Knights of the Vale answered to him. The wealth of the Vale was his to command. He had climbed from the fingers to the clouds, from a customs officer to a lord paramount, from nothing to everything, and he had done it all with gold and lies. Back in King's Landing, the war ground on. Robb Stark was betrayed and murdered at the Red Wedding, his northern host destroyed. Stannis survived on Dragonstone, planning his next move. The Ironborn raided the western coast. Daenerys Targaryen conquered cities in Slava's Bay, her dragons growing larger. The realm was broken. The crown's debt was insurmountable. The Iron Bank grew impatient. The Lannisters held power, but it was a hollow power, built on borrowed gold and false promises. And Petyr Baelish sat in the Eyrie, looking down at the world from his mountain fortress, and smiled. He had not conquered the 7 kingdoms. He had not sat the Iron Throne. He had not won the war. But he had won something more valuable. He had survived. He had prospered. And he had proven that in Westeros, the man who controls the gold controls everything. The lords of the realm spent their lives fighting over crowns and thrones. They believed power came from swords and armies. They believed that birth and blood determined destiny. But Petyr knew better. Power came from debt, from secrets, from information, from being indispensable, from climbing, always. Climbing, never stopping, never looking back. Chaos was not a pit. Chaos was a ladder. And Petyr Baelish had climbed higher than any man from the Fingers had ever dreamed. The kingdom was bought on credit, and the bill was coming due. But when it arrived, Petyr wouldn't be there to pay it. He would be safe in the Vale, surrounded by knights and mountains, counting his gold and planning his next move. Because the game was not over. It would never be over. There would always be another rung to reach, another prize to claim, another fool to manipulate. And Petyr Baelish would keep climbing until there was nowhere left to climb, or until someone finally pushed him off the ladder. But that was a problem for another day. For now, he had won, and that was enough.